there, welcome back to Garden Girl. My name is Breanna. Today I'll be talking about every gardener's worst enemy, and that's weeds. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to weed and also go through some of the most common weeds that you can find in your garden. Or you don't want to find them, but it helps to identify them so you know they're weeds. So let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few tools that you can use for weeding and that I've used and that are really helpful. And you don't have to have these, but they just make it a little easier. So one is some good gloves that not only protect your hands, but are also thin enough that you can weed. So try not to get like really thick gloves. These are Showas, I think. And they're really good. We use them a lot on the farm because you can still feel everything good, so that's really helpful. And you can get in between and you can really pull the weeds. That's one. I really like to use a hori hori. It's a Japanese kind of style spade tool. And it's really good for getting down and getting out deeply rooted weeds. So that's really good. And it's also really good for planting things as well. So this is one of our main handheld tools we have on hand. So it's really all-purpose, a really good tool. So there's that. There's other types of tools you can get. This is a stirrup hoe. And it's really helpful. It's more of a bigger tool, but it's really helpful for going in between rows and pulling up the weeds. And it's really helpful. You can get smaller ones as well. You can get handheld. I'll show on the screen a handheld version, kind of like this. You can get, and that's really helpful as well. Another thing that's really helpful to have is a little kneeling pad while you're weeding. And especially if you're going for a long time, it really helps to have one. And you can get these online, you can get them at most garden places. It's just really helpful to have. Lastly is some sort of a container, or this is a kind of a bag, foldable garden bag we use for all kinds of stuff, weeds and a different, for cleaning out a bed, you can use this. And it really helps. You can also use a wheelbarrow, but these are really portable and light and fast for hauling away weeds. So this is something pretty cool that we use, and I use it all the time. Okay, now let's go over some common weeds. So over here is clover, and that's just one of the main common clovers that are found in your yard. Here's one of the most common weeds you'll probably find in your garden, or at least I find in my garden all the time, and this is quackgrass. So any chance you can get, try to take as much of this out as possible because it is really rotten. It really spreads, and yeah, it's good to take it out. If you have like a tool like the hori hori, you can really pull it out and get as much as you can because it's rotten, this stuff. Here's some dandelions over here. Those are good to get out as well. They have a long taproot, so it's good to take those guys out. You got a wild kind of mallow type thing over here. That's a weed. Not very good in the garden. Canada thistle, bad thistle. Make sure you use gloves when you're pulling these guys out because they have pokey spines. And this is also a type of thistle over here. So we want to take that out as well. This is called lamb's quarter, and it's actually edible, but it's not very good in the garden. It gets quite large, and it competes for nutrient as well in your garden, so I'd pull that out as well. Here's some more close-ups of lamb's quarter. This is called medic, and it's kind of clover looking with little yellow flowers. This is called pennycress, and it's also quite invasive in the garden as well. This is the big version of pennycress. Now that we looked over some of the common weeds, I'm going to go over a few tips that'll help you when you're weeding. So number one when you're weeding is to try to water your garden well, or make sure your garden is moist. And this is really helpful because the weeds will come out much easier and you're not going to have to deal with trying to pull them out, especially the deep-rooted ones. So try to keep the garden watered, and this will help a lot more with weeding and make it easier to pull out those deeply rooted weeds. Another tip is to try to pull out the whole weed, and having something like a hori-hori or a tool really helps to get down and get underneath and get those roots out. Because sometimes, you know, you pull part of it out and it's okay, but if you can get as much as you can out, it'll slow the plant down and it won't grow back as fast. So if you can use like a tool or any sort of hoe or something, that really helps. Another thing to keep in mind for weeding is try to weed when the weeds are small, and this is hard to do all the time, but if you can keep on top of the weeds so that you can get them out when they're just small, they're easier to get out, easier to pull out, easier to pull the roots out, and then you'll be able to kind of slow them down a lot quicker and a lot easier. So this is tricky to do, but sometimes you can just spend a 15 to 20 minute session, or even just weed one bed or one area a day or in a week or a couple times a week, and that helps keep on top of these small weeds that are coming up versus letting them mature, and then you have big weeds and then you have to try to pull those out, and it's a lot more tiresome and aggravating and also time consuming as well. So just something to keep in mind. If you're thinking about a long-term way to prevent weeds, one way you can do that is by mulching your crops. And I don't do this as much because I haven't found like a really good mulch that I'm really excited about yet. I've tried hay in the past and it didn't work because there was weed seed, and so that kind of defeated the purpose. But I've heard lawn clippings are okay as long as they don't have seed in them. And there's other options out there if you want to try mulching. There's also fabric. Fabric is an option as well. That's more for in-ground garden, but you could do it on raised beds as well. And that you have to apply more when you plant your garden. But yeah, there's different options out there. Lastly, one more tip I want to share is to, when you plant your garden, try to plant a little more densely your plants and your vegetables, your flowers. And I can't take credit for this tip because I actually learned this from a channel called Am I Gardener, really helpful channel. And he talks a lot about high density spacing, which means you space your plants closer together. And that means it shades out the soil. The plants then take up the bed and your weeds aren't growing in between. So you can see kind of here where I have the beans more closer planted, there's less weed, and I'll actually show you some more instances. But it really helps because when you plant close as well, the plants can outcompete better the weeds, and then the weeds won't get as much sunlight and won't get as much nutrient from the soil as your vegetables or your flowers. So I'll show you some other areas where this is working really well. So this is my lettuce bed right here. And as you can see, I planted it more closer together. And there's not a lot of weeds in there. There's just a bit of grass growing. And if I would have spaced this romaine mix further apart, I would have had more weeds for sure. Or this way, it doesn't leave much room for weeds to grow. And any weeds that do grow have trouble competing because there's more density of vegetables than there is weeds. This is a good example here. I have Swiss chard growing in this bed, and I spaced it further apart. And as you can see, there's more weeds growing in between. Then over here in this bed, I also have Swiss chard and beets growing, but you see there's not as much weeds in there. There's more Swiss chard and beets, and they're growing faster than the weeds are. And that's a really good sign when your vegetables start outcompeting the weeds. So if you can plant denser, it really helps, because you have less bare soil for weeds to grow. This bed I haven't had hardly any trouble with because I really packed it full, and I don't know if I'd always pack it this full, but I have squash, corn, and beans growing, and it works really good actually, and I've barely had to weed this. There's a weed right there and here, but see, the vegetables are growing so quickly and are planted so densely that the weeds don't have a chance to develop. So that's really good. So hope you found this video helpful, and it gives you some tips on weeding and some of the common weeds you'll find. And make sure you don't stress out too much with weeding, and you just do the best you can and just enjoy the garden too, because that's what it's all about. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.